Hello and welcome to today's partner web conference. This is Fast Track Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations Enterprise Edition Tech Talk. Today's topic, integration tools within Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations. Joining us today from Microsoft, we have Praveen, who is a solution architect. Praveen, over to you.
Thank you, Janice. Welcome everyone to the second part of this talk. The first part of the talk dealt with integration frameworks within AX. This part 2 of this talk, we are going to talk more about how to utilize good orchestration tools and techniques in order to integrate with Dynamics. So things that we discussed last time kind of carries over. The one assumption that I have made is Dynamics 365 is there, and there is support added for triggers and webhooks through a custom solution. So that given, let's first see what we will be covering today. I would want to start off with a quick discussion on what are the key features that one has to pay attention to whenever they are building an integration flow. This is like a very generic common set of things that we want to make sure that we have them enabled, just so that we are building an enterprise-grade integration flow. The next set of topics that we will cover is more around what are the different integration platforms and tools that are available. And I'll start with a very broad overview, but then I'll start focusing a little bit more in detail on Azure-based solutions from Microsoft. And we'll go through some examples of reference solutions, and I have taken some key scenarios and I have showcased them on how this could be achieved. And towards the end, we'll finish the talk with some price cards that I calculated based on the pricing calculator for a US data center. So starting with the key considerations before you build any integration, and these are mostly about non-functional requirements at this point. So the first thing is around security. Since Dynamics 365 for Finance and Operations is a SaaS-based solutions, it is going to be on the cloud. And anyone who is trying to integrate to AX needs to ensure that they are doing so in a secure manner. There could be scenarios where AX is calling into an external web service, and you might have to expose it to external web service. And we want to pay attention to the fact that we are exposing it in the correct manner. Right? So this is one consideration. Another key consideration around the theme of security is around secrets management. If you really think about integration, it is built in a way where either the orchestrator or a set of key applications in your landscape will hold secrets belonging to other applications. So if the integration was built in a non-secure fashion, and even if one of the applications gets compromised, you can envision a chain reaction based on the dependency tree that you can build using who holds whose secret. You can see the vulnerability being rippled across your enterprise. So these are some key areas that we want to pay attention to and ensure that whatever we build is built on a platform that is secure, and we are following the best practices for those platforms. The second question that we want to think about is around scalability. We do not want whatever scenario that we write and build the orchestrator to be a bottleneck in orchestrating these integration flows. Since integration is an automated technique, there could be scenarios where the loads can vastly fluctuate. Say if you think of a scenario of a sales order coming through an e-commerce website. Since it is a publicly available website, we can only gauge that this is going to be your load, but there is always going to be cases where the load can go beyond what we expected. So having features and platforms selecting platforms which has that auto scale functionality would be an important consideration when you're choosing a platform and building your flow. Other thing which that we need to pay attention to is around high availability and disaster recovery. There could be scenarios where a single component or as a whole the data center which is holding your orchestrator can go down. We want to ensure that there is business continuity whenever we think of such a scenario. And there are, once again, platforms. I'll discuss each one of these in the context of Azure, and you can actually see that the advantages of using a platform similar to Azure to orchestrate the integration flows. The other key thing that we want to consider is around reliable messaging. So I basically define reliable messaging as a scenario where a message that fails at any point in the flow will not fail without leaving a marker. So if you could build a flow where an error message could fail or a message could get dropped without leaving any marker in your system, then it is not really a reliable messaging flow. And also the reliable messaging patterns would help you in ensuring that unless the data gets transmitted to another system and you get an acknowledgement, the data somehow is kept safe. So that you have the ability to retry. Even in a case of a component failure, you are able to restart your processing from a known failure point. So those are some considerations that we want to think about. Another key component is around extendability. Sometimes when we build integrations, they are built in a fashion that even if we sometimes want to make some minor changes, it involves a heavy DevOps workload in order to achieve it, right? Those are kind of the type of scenarios we want to avoid. Say, for instance, we have seen some customer scenarios where our customers have implemented point-to-point direct integrations. The problem with point-to-point direct integrations is if for whatever business reason or a technical reason, the set of fields or the schema of certain things needs to change, that really can only be implemented as a code hotfix, which basically means bringing down the system and loading up a new hotfix and bringing the system back up, which basically involves a downtime, which affects the business processing capability during that particular point in time, right? So having a solution that is extensible, which is a little bit more easier to manage and upgrade and kept outside of an application would be helpful. So these are all some key considerations to think about. Another feature that we want to think about is monitoring. So there are going to be so many flows that one would build using an orchestrator. And if there is no one unified view for us to know what is going on at different components, managing and DevOps, operating it in DevOps would become very untenable. So having a capability to monitor what is going on in the system becomes important. Similarly, we want to select a platform and a tool set that has support for notifications. It is not fun for someone to be glued to a monitoring dashboard and keep watching to ensure that something is going to fail or not. So it's better if the platform that we select has a notification capability that on a particular event occurring, there is a methodology that gets followed and somehow someone gets notified about it so someone can act upon it, right? The other set of things is around diagnostics and audit logs. So it's one thing for us to get notified. Now, fine, I got a notification saying there is an error in the system. Now, how would I go about debugging it and ensuring that I can quickly identify and rectify the issue? To aid with that, we need to have good capability around good diagnostics And similarly, we might also need to have support for audit logs. So audit logs and diagnostics, audit logs could even might even have things like when was the configuration changed, who changed it, what from which version it was changed, what was the last known value. So it's not just about the runtime, but about how things were even configured, right? And that also becomes an important part of your debugging process. There could also be sometimes compliance requirements where we want to log who is accessing a secret key about another application, things of that nature. Diagnostics is more about the runtime diagnostics that you would collect as the orchestrator proceeds. The last thing that we want to think about is DevOps capability. This could vary anywhere between having a mature ALM to having the ability to check in code, version control it, go take it through a build process and a release process, and have a way to deploy the orchestrator in an immutable fashion. So at any point in time, I'll be able to quickly bring down and restore it with a good level of automation. So given that as a background, now let me just quickly discuss about the different integration platforms and tools that we commonly see in the market. So there is a set of tools around BizTalk, Delbumi, Informatica, things of that nature, which are mostly our on-premises enterprise integration tools. That basically is one set of investments, one set of customers where we have seen them invest in tools of that nature. So that's a one set of platforms that we could leverage and utilize. The other platform, which where we have seen much more higher uptake very recently, is around the Azure integration platform and the solutions that provides. So Azure integration platform is not just one component. It's basically a platform with various components in it. And it basically allows you to pick these components in a modular fashion and utilize it in your scenarios in order for you to achieve your orchestration. So things like logic apps, function apps, service bus, Azure Blob Storage for service, for storage, application proxy which will help you expose your endpoints within your firewall in a secure manner, Azure Data Factory for you to build things like data warehouse scenarios, and API management. These are some popular components that are present in this Azure integration platform tools. The other platform which is available right now is what we call as a common data service. This is basically the platform that sits beneath Power Apps, and it also provides some integration capabilities. And we'll also discuss in what type of scenarios we would consider which of the platforms over the other. And we also have seen custom integration solutions out in the market. These are written either point-to-point by partners or customers. We also have a community-supported tool, which was recently released, like about a few months back. It's called Recurring Integration Scheduler. These are all tools that kind of falls under the customs integration solutions bucket, and we'll see when to use it, what the risks are, how would you make that judgment. So obviously, when we make a choice, we have to choose between which enterprise platform, integration platform we want to choose. We want to be very mindful about the landscape in which where our applications live. So when you have a bunch of applications which live in the cloud and you're trying to orchestrate processes and data among them, it kind of makes sense to choose an orchestrator that also lives in the cloud. Having an on-premises orchestrator in a scenario of this sort is not very efficient, because you're trying to move data between one application which sits in the cloud, bring it to on-premises, do your transformations, do your logic changes, and then move it back into another application which is also in the cloud, right? So it's not a very efficient model. So selecting a platform which is cloud-based in a scenario like this would be helpful. The same thing applies on the flip side. So if you are very on-premises applications heavy, then you may want to consider an orchestration platform that is sitting on premises. And we have seen customers who are both cloud heavy and on-premises heavy. So in those cases, the patterns that we have seen is they would typically have like a BizTalk or an on-premises orchestrator, as well as they will have a cloud-based orchestrator like Logic Apps. And whenever there is a need for them to do this hybrid integrations, they would basically let the orchestrators communicate among themselves. And there are some patterns and practices that one could use in the hybrid communication methodology, so that you avoid rewriting logic in both orchestrators in multiple times. Things like exposing standardized endpoints. So an application sends it to the standardized endpoint, and someone else decides who is supposed to process. Things of those nature are some good patterns to keep our eye out for. We have also seen customers where they choose a cloud-based orchestrator where they are cloud heavy, and maybe they integrate with a very few set of line of business applications. So this is also a possibility. We have seen the flip of that as well. So it really depends upon where would one draw a line, and it's more a judgment call and also a call from a vision standpoint. So as a company, if someone is making a decision in vision standpoint that they would want to move to the cloud, then building their orchestrator in the cloud, even though today they may not have all the applications in the cloud, kind of might help. So when it comes to on-premises platforms, when we are building anything that is mission critical, we want to stick with the standard enterprise middleware, which is like the BizTalk, Informatica, things of that nature. Whenever we look at anything that is custom written or including the recurring integration scheduler, we want to ensure and evaluate it in the context of the key set of scenarios that I discussed in slide number 1. Having gone through that process, if everything looks correct and implementable for you, then you can go ahead and utilize it. In a scenario where many of the key components are missing, utilizing a custom written tool, it poses a very significant risk. In happy path scenarios, which is where most people would expect to see the orchestrator be, it might work. But we always need to be mindful that especially integrations across many applications coming together will always have failures at some point in time or other. It's better that we are prepared for it and implement the correct set of features before uptaking anything that is custom. So let me start discussing about the cloud-based solutions. So the popular cloud-based solutions that we have seen from within Microsoft is Microsoft Flow, the Azure integration toolset, with Logic App being like a key orchestrator component in it. And then we have seen the Common Data Service. So if you think of Microsoft Flow, we want to utilize Microsoft Flow more for a self-service type scenario. This is not a place where someone would go and build a mission critical IT developer driven solutions. These are mostly for business user and end users who want to basically solve something like a last mile problem where, okay, I have all my data coming into a SharePoint. Now, whenever someone adds a value to a SharePoint, I want to be notified by email, or I want to send an SMS to someone else. These are kind of the last mile problems that as an individual or as a small team can quickly go and innovate using Microsoft Flow in order for them to complete that problem, and they will be able to quickly achieve that scenario. Microsoft Flow is not envisioned to be the centrally managed application across an enterprise. This is more for self-service scenarios. Compared to that, the Azure integration toolset is more for the IT pro dev scenarios, where it is going to be centrally managed. It is going to have a rich ALM feature sets, the version controlling, management, performance testing, things of that nature would all be targeted when you're trying to build scenarios using the Azure integration toolset. The common data service would fit in scenarios where you're trying to orchestrate, at least today the capabilities are when you're trying to orchestrate scenarios across first-party Dynamics 365 applications, as well as when you want to have a unified view of your data and build applications on top of it or integrate on top of it, then common data service might be a good fit. Say, for example, when you think of a customer record, there are information pertaining to a customer that the ERP holds. There are certain attributes about a customer that the CRM system holds. Let's say if you want to build an application where you want to see that unified view in one place and build applications on top of it or build integrations on top of it, then something like a common data service would help. And it is a growing feature set. Today, there is support for asynchronous data exchange in bulk. Moving forward, you will see other feature sets being added to this platform. The popular other scenarios where this is very commonly used is also when someone wants to build mobile applications on top of this unified data, then Power Apps basically plays very well within, the CDS and Power Apps integration is much more tighter. So if you have scenarios of that nature, then CDS would be a good platform for you. So this is basically the view that I was talking about for the common data service. You can actually see that we have operations and other parts of the system all getting integrated through a single database, if you will, which we call as the common data platform. And you'll be able to either orchestrate a business process or build apps and other workflows on top of it is a possibility on this platform. Say, for example, this is a sample scenario where there has been support and out-of-box template that has been released for it. So this is basically the prospect to cache data flow. You can actually see that in this particular flow, there are parts of that flow which would be solved by application number one, which is sales. And the second part of the flow is being fulfilled by another application, which is finance and operations. And there needs to be data that needs to be constantly synced periodically so that the handoff is smoother. And the CDS platform would allow you to do that. And this is basically the sample flow for it. So let me quickly log into the Power Apps scenario and just show you how that integrator look and feel looks like. So once you log in, if you go into the admin center, so I'm already in the admin center. You can actually see that you can create projects here. And as part of creating projects, you can define what is called a connection set. A connection set would basically hold your login information relating to the various systems that is coming into the picture. Once you have defined it, you'll be able to say, this is one simple scenario that I created. You can actually see that this is trying to map between the contacts in the CDS to contacts in the destination, which is the CRM system. And if I look at the map, you can actually see the data entities and the schema from the source system and the target system being provided like this. And you can basically go ahead and do the mapping that is needed. There are some simple transformation functions that are available today. And using this, you can, if your scenario fits well within the within these transformations, then you'll be able to use them. So if you have outgrown this or the feature set is not quite matching what you need, then you have to move into a pro dev scenario. So which is basically the Azure integration toolsets. So if you look at the Azure integration toolsets, it is really a platform with a wide array of modular components that you have to pick and choose and build a scenario that kind of would help you achieve your orchestration. I have tried to earmark some of the common ones that I have seen people use. So the most common one that people have seen people build orchestrations is using Logic Apps. It is meant for building workflows. And the other one is Azure Functions. So Logic Apps works by something called a connector, and I'll show you a quick demo of it. So there are cases where you may not have a connector. In that case, either you can use Azure Function or you can build your own custom connector. So building a custom connector can be done using an API app. This is for your line of business applications where you want to build a connector and utilize it only for your organization. Then you'll be able to write an API app and basically use Logic Apps to talk to it. Then we have seen things like event hubs, notification hubs, service buses. These are all some popular components that are used for integration purposes. Similarly, Data Factory is used for scenarios where we are trying to build a data warehouse and you want to do your typical ETL and processing of data to create your aggregate measures and fact tables. Data Factory is a good component to use in that scenario. And then we have Traffic Manager and Express Routes. Those are more from a networking point of view. So Traffic Manager would help you keep your system highly available for business continuity. Express Route would help you ensure that you have a dedicated pipeline between your on-premises network and to the Azure data center so that you can have predictable latency and bandwidth. In security and identity, a common one that we see is Azure Active Directory. This is like a requisite to integrate with any of the integration APIs in AX. Key Vault is going to be a place where you can store all your secrets. These could be places where you would save secrets relating to talking to another application. So therefore, in an off chance that the application that you have is compromised, the secrets are not readily available to the attacker. API management is another component that we have seen many customers use, and these are used in the context of throttling, monitoring calls that comes into the system, things like providing a developer documentation for the APIs that you want to expose to other departments or people outside your organization. You can also help with writing proxy patterns and even simple transformations. API management would be helpful there. And we have seen log analytics being used as a monitoring tool in order to monitor all of these components in one single place. So I'm just going to show you a quick demo of how a Logic App looks like. For many of you might have seen what a Logic App is and might have already played with it. If that is not the case, I thought I'll take a few minutes to just introduce you to Logic Apps. So Logic Apps, this is basically I logged into my Azure portal. So then you can go to the blade for Logic Apps, and I'm going to start a new Logic App just to see what experience looks like. So you can basically create provide a name. App 01, select a subscription, create new. I'm going to say it's going to be TechTalk 03. I can choose a location where I want to deploy this Logic App. And once it has deployed, what it's going to provide you is a canvas where you can go and utilize connectors to build a workflow. This is the same canvas that you would see if you're using Microsoft Flow. The key difference is, in fact, Microsoft Flow is built on top of Logic Apps. The key difference is Logic App would give you that IT professional developer experience, where a simple connector, if it's not a good fit for you, then you will be able to go to the code behind, make changes, things of that nature. So this has been deployed. So I'm going to you can actually, there's a bunch of starter templates that are available for you. If you want, they can pick it up and try it out. Let me see if there is a simple example that I can quickly deploy and showcase. Let me do this. So this is basically a connector. The connector basically says whenever someone posts a HTTP request, what someone should do. I'm going to basically say whenever someone posts, I'm just going to do a simple request response pattern. I'm going to search for a HTTP connector. Response. Or in fact, what will be better useful is let me show you a scenario which is pertaining to AX itself. In that way, we'll both learn and as well as see a scenario. So this is a scenario for importing files through the data management platform. We have seen how this code looks like in our previous TechTalk. So if I go to the package importer, this basically shows the flow on how to basically move a file which is sitting on an Azure Blob Storage or on your on-premises folder into AX and make it import through the Dynamics, the data management platform. So the first step that we do is basically get a writable URL from AX. Once we authenticate it and we get a URL back, we'll basically use that URL to upload a blob into that particular location. And then we'll basically call import on that particular file. Once we have scheduled an import, we'll be checking in a loop to see, we'll basically keep polling to see if the file has successfully completed its import. If it is successfully completed, we basically would execute success logic. If it failed, we'll have to do error handling. So this is a very simple flow. Let me basically now show you how we could achieve this in Logic Apps. So I have a Logic app here. I'm going to go to the designer view of it. So this is a designer view. The way that I have envisioned this scenario is I'm going to start with a file that is sitting on a blob storage. This is Azure Storage Explorer, which will help you add and delete files through a UI to an Azure blob. So the scenario starts by whenever someone adds a file to a blob storage, what should happen, right? So Logic App basically has a trigger and an action following it. So the trigger is basically whenever someone adds a new file. The thing that we do is first, there's a connector for AX. If I were to add a new action, you'll actually see all the actions that are possible. So if I search for Dynamics, so this is a connector that we have. You can actually see that there's a bunch of operations that you can, actions that you can do. The one that I'm utilizing is called execute an action. So if I select that, I need to select what instance that I need to talk to. I'm talking to an instance called retail demo 225 and something following it. And it basically, if I do a drop down on the actions, it basically shows me all the actions that are possible using the data entities. So let me delete this. So that's the connector I'm using. And basically there's an action called get Azure writable URL. And that's the action I'm calling. And I'm just basically providing it a unique file name by using a GUID operator here. So once I have that, I'm basically passing the output into a particular known schema. So this basically provides a blob ID and a blob URL. The next step that I do is basically read the content of the file from the blob storage. And I upload that file to that blob URL that I got in my previous call to AX. And I also upload the file content to that location. Once I have successfully uploaded the file, I'm calling import on it, which basically has a action here that says import from package. And it takes a parameter called blob URL and the name of the data project. The execution ID, this is more for if you want to re-execute things. And the execute here says whether I want to execute the target step or not. Overwrite basically says, hey, can I overwrite if there is a similar file? The legal entity here, I have hard-coded it. You can infer this using your file names. There are various ways to parameterize this if you want. So this would basically schedule an import within the data management platform. And once that is done, I have a simple do-while loop over here where I'm checking for the status if that particular package that was scheduled completed its export or not. And this is the API that I call get execution summary status. And if it's successful, I send an email. If it's failed, I send a failed email for this simple scenario. So let me show you how this looks. I'm going to basically copy this file and repaste it by deleting it. So this should technically trigger the workflow. So if I were to come to the import and look at the overview tab and keep refreshing, or even in fact, I can trigger it just so that we are not waiting for it. There we go. So here it looks like it has picked it up and it is executing that flow. And you can actually see how nicely it provides all the different steps and what happened within those steps. You can actually see both the raw inputs and the raw outputs. And it clearly says where it is presently executing. So far it has uploaded it to AX and it has scheduled the import. So if we go into AX now, we should be able to see that this file is being processed. So let me go into AX and refresh this. So here I can see that my file is being presently imported. So if I go back to Logic Apps, I should see it's still running. So, okay, anyway, in the interest of time, this would basically run. At the end of the demo, I'll come back to it and I'll show you how this looks. I have some successful runs over here. You can actually see that it was able to run through it. Once it succeeded, it checks whether it is succeeded or failed. If it succeeded, it executed the step and it sent me an email. Yep. So the one that we scheduled also had completed. It had sent me an email. If I check in my inbox, I should basically see a message with the subject, and this is its body. So this is a very simple example of how you can utilize Logic Apps to send files to AX. So now with that as a background, let me just go through some simple patterns. So for near real-time messaging, now you can model scenarios that look like this, where you can use a service bus in a queue mode, send data to that. The Logic App can pick it up and send it to AX. This is a similar scenario, but in topic mode. Basically, we send it to a service bus and then we send it to multiple applications. This is basically a competing consumer pattern. So in this scenario, you can imagine deploying multiple Logic Apps, which all act in parallel on the service bus and moves the data into to Dynamics. This would not add additional cost to the consumer because Logic Apps are billed per usage. So this is a highly scalable way of scaling out your middleware and only paying for usage. This is a scenario where the data that we have in the service bus is not enough to send it to AX. There needs to be some sort of data enrichment that needs to happen before Logic Apps can send it over to Dynamics. So here we are utilizing the bring by own database functionality, where we'll push things like the reference data into that, and then when a Logic App processes the request, it can basically enrich the data before sending it to AX. So this is a way to generate encrypted files. So let's say you have a custom process which is exporting out a file, and you want that file to be encrypted both whenever it is addressed and in motion. So already we utilize SSL TLS support to basically encrypt any traffic that we send. But the file, when it lands to a storage blob directly, it would be in clear text form. If you want to avoid it, the scenario over here wants to avoid that. We don't want it to be in clear text. So we can use a key vault. A key vault can hold a certificate, and AX will have permission to key vault to encrypt your file. Once you have encrypted, that file is what you sent it to storage blob. AX will not have decrypting permissions. The same way, the Azure function in this scenario, which is utilized to decrypt, will have permissions to decrypt the file, and Azure functions will decrypt the file just in time when it is actually sending it out to someone else. That way, the storage blob, when even if the admin gets access to those files, it is in an encrypted format. So these are some synchronous call scenarios. Hey, this is a scenario where someone wants to do protocol mediation, where someone is sending files through me through using AS2, but AX only talks using OData. So basically, we kind of do the protocol mediation using the logic apps. This is another scenario where we expose AX's endpoint to an external world. And either for some partner developers to contact, or someone who's building a mobile application within your department to talk to AX, things of that nature. There are cases where one would be worried about load, and what if there is a bad or an offending code that is causing this bad behavior in generating this synthetic load and bringing down production. So similarly, when we expose endpoints to third parties, these could even be for scenarios around EDI and stuff like that, where we want to be a little bit careful about throttling and monitoring who is calling into our systems, even when they are making a synchronous RPC call. In those type of scenarios, you can use API management and expose any endpoint of AX through that and provide permissions through that. That way, when we know that one of the players is exceeding their quota, we can basically throttle them and bring conformance. So this is the file-based integration scenario that I showcased. So you can basically, this is the exact scenario that I actually, in fact, demoed. So someone can add a file to a blob storage, and Logic App can listen to that event, pick it up, process it, send it to AX, monitor for success or failure, and then take decisions accordingly. Logic also has a component called an on-premises data gateway. When deployed, Logic Apps will be able to even monitor your file shares that are hosted behind your firewall. And this gateway requires you to open only outbound ports. That way you can, there's no inbound ports occurring at runtime. So another scenario that I wanted to touch base on, this was around the EDI scenarios. We saw that even in the polling for the last session that there was a good representation of customers who had EDI. So I wanted to basically at least talk about and position a way to build an EDI scenario. So the type of considerations that went into this particular scenario was, we did not want to make Dynamics the EDI orchestrator, which would basically involve customizing heavily, writing a lot of code, doing the translations and everything within Dynamics. Rather, we wanted to keep it outside of the ERP and let an orchestrator capable of handling EDI integrations do this. We all know that BizTalk has this capability traditionally, but we want to discuss it more in the cloud-based world. So I want to showcase a scenario where you can utilize Logic Apps to basically do that scenario. So the ERP over here, so AX would basically participate in this orchestration either as a producer or consumer of data and events. It by itself does not do any of the translations and orchestrations, and that is by design. And so Logic Apps has a functionality called B2B. The B2B stands for business to business, and there is an pack called Enterprise Integration Pack, and this basically provides customers the ability for them to do an EDI orchestration. So as part of it, so here is basically the scenario drawings that I had. So we have AX. AX, basically, I have assumed that we are adding a custom event here, which is a small customization, which would be listening to a purchase order create or a sales order create or things of nature that is important for someone to trigger the flow of a EDI send or a receive. In this case, I'm showcasing a send. So once that happens, it basically sends that event to event grid ingester. So this is basically a low latency call. It may or may not have all the data embedded within that event itself. Most cases, I'm going to assume it is not going to have all the data needed for your EDI in that event itself, because we want to keep the event very lightweight. That way we have low latency reactive applications that can react to it in much faster manner. So once we log that event, The event grid basically exposes that event for anyone to subscribe to it. So this basically is the component that provides the webhook capability, if you will. So here I'm imagining a scenario where Logic App can actually listen to that webhook. And whenever, let's say, this is a purchase order create scenario. So when a purchase order gets created, there is an event gets triggered that goes to the event webhook. The webhook triggers a Logic App. The Logic App at that point understands the event, but it now needs to go and collect data in order for it to build out the XML document. So the first thing it can do is go back to AX and collect the, let's say the event provides a context ID for a purchase order number. So Logic App can go and pick up the purchase order, export it out. Since we are doing an XML-based translations, a composite entity here might be very useful. So once we have that, there could be some additional information missing. Either these information will be coming from reference tables, reference records. So those type of data enrichment can be done by making a call to the BringY own database location, which actually be hosting our reference data. This could be master records, this could be reference records, right? You know, the charge type, transportation type, methods of delivery, things of that nature, which are fairly static but needed for me to enrich my message. So that's the second call it makes, that's the enrichment. So here is where the key set of capabilities that Logic App provides with the Enterprise Integration Pack. So now I have my starting message from AX, but I cannot send that directly out to my end customer. There needs to be a translation depending upon the protocol, either a signing and an encryption that might be needed, and also the ability to manage control numbers and as well as manage MDN acknowledgements or TA1 acknowledgements depending upon the protocol, things of that nature. Those are all encompassed and provided by this particular feature pack. So this, once someone purchases this pack, they'll be able to go define partners. So partners would basically, so I have a example scenario where I'm doing a partnership between Fabricam and Contoso, two favorite companies. And you can define what we call as trade agreements. A trade agreement basically would say for a given EDI flow, what is the protocol that company A and company B has agreed to. And there is also tools for someone to define a schema and tools to map between these two schemas. As well as there is a key vault integration where someone can add their certificates and use that certificates to basically do signing and encryption of data before sending it over. And another key aspect about Logic App's EDI flow is that the protocol and the transport mechanism or the transformations and the transport mechanism are kind of decoupled. So if you think of an AS2 message, I could basically do my AS2 encoding, but once I have done the AS2 encoding, now it's up to the Logic Apps or as a designer, up to you to decide how you want to actually transport it. Whether you are going to make a web service call or do you want to send it to a FTP location where someone else is going to pick up, or it's going to be an email that you're going to send. Since this is very decoupled, it's completely up to you to decide how you want to orchestrate that final flow. To pin all of these together, we have the log analytics, which provides you the ability to do log searches, log management, notifications, and dashboard. So think of this log analytics being used across in all other scenarios as well. So since we are closer to the top of the hour, I'll quickly complete the presentation and then show you the demo. So drilling a little bit more detailed into the last bit, which is the log analytics portion, I want to showcase how we would envision building a monitoring capability. So I'm kind of splitting this monitoring into two parts. One is what I call as the hot path. The other is basically a warm or a cold path. The hot path are things where when an event occurs, I want the notification to show up on my dashboard in a fairly quick manner, within a few seconds, if you will, or even less than that. So those are typically around service health or anything that is extremely business critical, where someone needs to quickly act upon and have a higher SLA. So in those type of scenarios, I'm envisioning using a component like Event Hub and pairing it with Stream Analytics. So Event Hub provides a distributed low latency eventing ingestion system. So AX can send events to it. If there is a service health API, you can direct that telemetry into Event Hubs as well. And for many of the components, this is natively available in Azure. So it's just a configuration for you to route that into an Event Hub. Once it is an Event Hub, you can build simple logic on basically making sense of what that event is and deciding which dashboard to update and things of that nature. So this is basically for the hot path scenario where someone needs to quickly be notified about certain things. The warm path is more for a dashboarding capability which lags behind anywhere between a few minutes to say 30 minutes, or 10 minutes to 15 minutes type lag is acceptable in some scenarios. Those would basically be routed through a warm path. The cold path is type of scenarios where it's okay for us to look at telemetry and dashboarding delayed by a day or so. We would normally, if we could automate stuff, we would stay in the hot path and warm path. There are some scenarios where people would have custom logs that they upload by once a day or something. In those kind of scenarios, it basically becomes a cold path. So there is nothing that the framework stops you from having a pure warm path for everything. But it's a limitation on different applications depending upon their scenarios. This might end up being the case. So for a warm path scenario, you could send events through applications insights from AX, and application insights has a way to plug into the log analytics piece. This entire rectangle is log analytics. This is one component. I have just showcased the inner components just for better understanding. So you can have eventing coming from application insights, other data sources, other diagnostics from Azure components, or you can purchase ready-made ISV solutions or solutions that Azure ships to basically create the records, eventing records that all sits into a repository. Then basically there's a tool called Log Analytics that basically lets you query over that log. And once using those queries, you can basically build a dashboard which is native in Log Analytics itself. What we have seen customers who needed a hot path do is not, instead of building the dashboard here, they basically would build a Power BI dashboard that consumes both the log analytics data as well as the hot path data. So there is one place where they can view everything together. OMS has capabilities around alerting, so sending an SMS, logging a ServiceNow ticket, sending an email to someone, things of that nature you can do, and these alerting are flexible and it's rule-based. So this is a simple, this is a Logic Apps B2B dashboard scenario that is shipped out of the box. So when you deploy a Logic Apps B2B and this dashboard, you'll be able to monitor how your EDI messages flow through the system. This is like some simple simulated numbers that showcase how the dashboard looks itself. So once you have a failure, then you'll be able to drill down into your failure messages, know from which partner it is failing from, and then you can pick your investigations from there. So the final thing that I want to end with quickly is basically showcase some rate cards. This is I have made some assumptions about many of the scenarios in order to build this thing, but just think of this as a sample for you to kind of ballpark when you build a scenario, how much would it's going to cost when you're building it in Azure, right? You might have to revisit it and price it for your specific scenario for your data center. Prices do vary by data center sometimes. So those are all the things that I would put as disclaimers before discussing this topic. So for file scenarios, I'm kind of assuming we saw those connector blocks, like each block becomes an action. So I kind of looked at some common file connector scenarios, and it kind of looks like around 20 actions per file is what gets executed when you upload a file. If the same thing is done using Azure Functions, what we have seen is it takes about 2 invocations, one to upload, one to monitor. And the assumption over here is the file size is less than 128 MB. For messaging scenarios, I have priced using logic apps where a single message takes about somewhere between 3 to 5 actions. Azure Functions, it's standard 2 actions. And there is an additional service bus operation if it is an async message. That's one operation. You can see all the rate cards over here. These are some general numbers. If you do 1 million operations on service bus, you pay 5 cents. For logic apps, it is a staggered amount, and you can see that these are extremely low numbers. And on top of it, function app, depending upon whether you choose a consumption plan, you might get the first million operations free. And subsequently, the other set of million operations would cost you 20 cents. And there is a cost for memory usage as well. So using this, I priced some of the real customer scenarios. So we have a customer who was uploading about 120 files a day. So their cost to basically do that scenario basically turned out to be $80 a month, and they would pay blob storage $2 for it, so making $82 a month as a total. This is a second scenario where they do the same integration but using function apps instead of logic apps. So since they only make 5,000 invocations a month, this would get covered under the consumption plan. So their cost total is about $12 a month. Similarly, this is a scenario where 2,000 sales orders per day is done for 30 days. So the 30-day total looks like this. And the same thing done through function apps. This is a scenario where we had a customer who was uploading about 1,000 plus files a day. And their grand total came about $462 a month. But when we took a look at it, it actually turned out to be that it was not quite optimized for what they were trying to do. But when we ended up optimizing, for example, instead of downloading one an employee, getting employee records separately, position records separately, and so on and so forth. Instead of doing that, you can create a data package and consolidate your flows. By consolidating it, we were able to bring down that number. This is the same thing if they would have chosen to orchestrate using function apps. So that's basically the end of my presentation. The key thing that I want to call out here is Logic App basically provides you that ability with a workflow and provide the error handling and stuff at a workflow level, which is very orchestrator centric component. Function app is basically allows a person to write code in one of their popular languages, C#, things of that nature. So when it comes to debugging and monitoring, Logic App is a better fit as an orchestrator than Function App. Function App is a logic executor, logic execution engine that can supplement a Logic App in many scenarios. But that's the reason you are seeing the price differences among those. So this is more a pure pro developer experience. This helps you with the visual mapping and error handling and things of that nature in a more visual fashion. So I think we are at the top of the hour. So I'll basically end the talk here and jump over to Q&A. So I'm showcasing my questions here. Can I use BizTalk as a middleware to synchronize integration scenarios? Did you mean synchronize or make synchronized integration scenarios? I'm not quite sure. If you could reply back, I can answer that question. Data says usage license. So this, there will be a licensing impact in future. Today, it is not licensed by integration calls, but this is something that you can expect to happen soon. There is discussions being held within Microsoft on how to upgrade our licensing model. Can CDS integration be used for real-time scenarios, which means create customer, sales, stuff like operations and written customer account? While this is possible, you will not be able to use the CDS sync framework today to basically achieve it. So you can still use the CDS for storing your unified data, The orchestration beyond it would either go through Logic Apps or Flow on top of CDS today. The connector that we have today only supports the synchronous flows, periodic sync flows and not real time. But at some point in future, you might see new feature sets added to that. So if you want to have a real-time integration between both systems, it's better to utilize Logic Apps and components similar to that. If in terms of roadmaps and other stuff, it'll be better for you to contact your solution architect working on your project. He might be able to put you in touch with the CDS team for you to better assess and understand your scenario. CDS and data integrator are used in an interchangeable manner, or at least like I have used it in an interchangeable manner. So they are not two different components. So it's CDS. In some presentation, I have seen the term data integrator being used. That is technically an internal component name sitting in CDS, which is actually doing the connections and doing the periodic movement of data. Yes, so this is possible. The trigger needs to be implemented using a webhook. Then we'll be able to achieve that scenario. Can you run logic app execution in a recurrence mode, which means no manual information? Yes, you'll be able to set recurrence. So there is a connector called recurrence, and you'll be able to set at what periodic interval do you want to trigger a flow, and it will basically execute it. Yeah, again, for real-time scenarios, today it is better to utilize Logic Apps to do synchronizations between, say, finance and operations and sales and so on and so forth. Today, the capability of CDS is around periodic updation of records when you want to move things in mass in an async fashion. Okay, I don't see any other questions at this point. Janice, I'll hand it off to you at this point.
All right, great. Thank you, Praveen. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to take a moment and bring your attention to a link that I posted in the messages panel. That's a link to a short survey for this web conference. We ask that you please take a moment before logging out to access it. We hope that you found today's information helpful, and if you enjoyed today's web conference or have feedback on how we can provide you with a better event, this is your chance to let us know. The survey scores are on a scale from 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest score possible. And that is going to conclude today's web conference. Attendees may access the web conference recording by the same registration link used to attend today's live broadcast. I'd like to extend a big thank you to our presenter, Praveen, and thank you, audience, for logging in and joining us today.